Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Welcome back to an action-packed conversation today on what happened here. We're live on WVOX 1460 on your AM dial or worldwide at WVOX.com. Today on what happened here, hosted by former Mount Vernon Mayor Richard Thomas. We are going to be talking about New York State, the cannabis court halt. We're going to talk about the migrant crisis that is literally out of control. And we're going to talk a little bit about the GOP debates and, they're debating about the front runner. And President Trump will touch upon briefly the latest federal indictment that he's facing, or the state indictment in Georgia, just to kind of make sure we touch all the bases with our special guest, former Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District, Charles Knapp, who also served as a former Manhattan District Attorney, Assistant District Attorney, excuse me, and also served as Inspector General in the city of Mount Vernon. And the call-in number, if you want to talk to us or discuss with us or debate with us, we know you're out there listening, John. We want to hear from you at 914-636-0110. Again, that's 914-636-0110. So, a lot to unpack, a lot to do, a lot to discuss. Charlie, thank you for joining the show. We have a lot of ground to cover. Looking forward to diving into the issues, and I guess the most prescient one is the migrant crisis. I know a lot of people have been expressing concerns. There's a new Siena poll out that talks about how more than 80% of New Yorkers believe that the migrant crisis is not being handled properly by New York State, New York City, or even the federal government. So, what's your thinking on this? I mean, where there, if anything, it looks like Mayor Adams has been trying to advocate to try and get real help to address the migrant crisis, but it just seems like it's falling on deaf ears. Am I reading this wrong?
Right. And if you step back, and this is one of those examples of be careful what you wish for, because it's only been in the past 120 years of our country's history that the federal government decided that immigration was an exclusively federal issue and therefore a federal problem. There are good reasons for that: foreign relations, border control, all of that. Those are federal matters, not state matters. And now we have a problem because Congress has been incapable of addressing the immigration problem for the past 40 some odd years, that, you can't stop people from moving who feel that their circumstances are so dire in their home country for whatever reason: economic, terrorism, narco-terrorism, you name it, corruption. Doesn't really matter. These people are on the move, and we need a nationwide program to control it. You're not going to stop it. We're talking about legal immigration, which means control and sanctions for people who are caught breaking the law. Uh, because the federal government has been completely incapable of discharging the obligation it brought on itself 100 some odd years ago, what we're witnessing is really the equivalent of help by state. And some of them are just offloading immigrants into the interior, their own taxpayers' expense. And there's some sort of program that it's really half-baked, quite frankly, when we're looking at the results that the Biden administration has moved the immigrant population across many states so that everyone theoretically shares the burden equally, but that doesn't seem to have been managed particularly well. And in the interim, you have the immigrants who are suffering because they don't know really what's going on, and you have all the local population suffering because they do not have the tools at the moment to deal with the number of people who are being sent into their community. And that's where the rub is. And it's not just Mayor Adams who is advocating for federal and state support. Former Governor David Patterson made a very eloquent pitch for Governor Hochul to get her act together and address the problem before it spins out of control, because If left to its own devices, unfortunately, you're going to be pitting communities versus communities. And we saw a little bit of this until the courts intervened, where Orange County and Rockland County and some others said, we're not taking New York City's immigrant overflow population. And that's really not, the way forward. The way forward is really for Congress to sit down and make the tough decisions. And by the way, on that, I just want to make one particular point. A lot of the prior attempts at regularizing the immigration situation fell apart on one word and one word only: amnesty. And frankly, completely distort the discussion, the necessary discussion that needs to happen. We have anywhere between 13 and 30 million illegal immigrants, and that range really means we have no idea how many illegal immigrants there are in the country at any given point. But what it does mean is you can't throw them out. That's just not going to happen. We discussed this on an earlier program. Unless you increase Customs and Border Control and ICE by a factor of probably 100, they just don't do that. Prioritizing and getting responsible, that's too difficult for them to do, so they go raise their houses, whatever else, look for hardworking, those illegal immigrants who are doing jobs that most Americans don't want to do, and they're deporting them. So, that's a wrong priority. But in terms of amnesty, there's always one group that seems to get amnesty every couple of years, and those are the big corporations and very wealthy individuals who store their profits offshore to avoid taxes. And every couple of decade or so, the federal government decides, well, we'll waive penalties and interest if you bring back your funds, and in some cases, they give them a tax break to boot. So if you're going to have amnesty for entities like that, I think, to put it bluntly, the Christian thing to do is to consider an amnesty program for people at a minimum who do not have any criminal record in the country. I think that's the one step toward resolving the matter. And on top of that, it's going to take funding for shelter, education by the federal government to help relieve the burden on the affected community. So that's my view on that.
Well, I mean, look, I can totally agree and acknowledge that, the situation we have right now is tenuous and unacceptable. You have communities that are just passing resolutions, laws, going to court saying, don't bring, the population here because we can't handle it. From Suffolk County to Nassau County to Rockland and Orange, as we've been, discussing. But what's clear to me is there's definitely a delay in the federal government from taking a position or a stand, period. And be it funds or be it a flexible structure to kind of help um, the migrants be more productive with their time here. It's very, you know, it seems as if the federal government's just closing their eyes saying, this is not happening, this is not happening. And then they open their eyes and see, oh no, it's happening. But still they're doing nothing about it.
Well, I don't know that they're closing their eyes. They're just full of act. They know very well uh, that there's a crisis, and don't kid yourself. Uh, it's just going to get worse. And now I'm probably going to annoy a certain segment of your audience, but let's just call it the current uh, disturbing trends in the weather. Let's put it that way. If that continues, then you are going to see areas in Central and South America where agriculture was a bit tenuous, let's say, reach a tipping point, and people will be moving en masse for the reasons that they've been moving historically in the past, namely seeking greener pastures, so to speak. And it's not just the United States. Canada, Europe, the areas where there are states at the moment need to get together and come up with rules internationally, because otherwise, it is a disaster foretold. As it is, in the past, I think, year or two, maybe a little bit more, like 25,000 people have crossed the Mediterranean trying to reach Europe. I mean, that's just not acceptable. And on top of which, you're talking about human trafficking and people exploiting the vulnerable. Governments need to step in, and that's the larger problem, and that's just coming down the pipe. Uh, but for present purposes, the United States government has to get together and formulate a reasonable immigration solution, and they are out there. There have been things that have been proposed, but it's going to take political will, political capital, a smart and generous funding program, and also the understanding of the American people. Look, we're all, unless we're Native Americans, we're all immigrants of the past couple of centuries. And sure, there were no immigration laws until the end of the 19th century, when you had racial exclusion laws in the West Coast to keep the Chinese or Japanese out.
Right.
But other than that, there were no rules. So, by definition, there was no illegal immigration problem, because there was no lawful immigration. There was immigration, period. Since the teens and 20s, you have laws that, for the most part, appeal to people who were afraid of foreigners, or who wanted to pull up the ladder after they'd gotten to the top, or, frankly, the labor unions were always against immigration, because they felt improperly, I believe, based on the evidence, that would drive down wages. That's not what drives down wages. And the people who are coming across the border, by and large, are not trying to become your neurosurgeon. They're already willing and able to do jobs that most Americans are simply not willing to engage in. And that needs to all be looked at. We need personally to be a little bit more generous in our outlook on the stranger, so to speak. That's what the Bible teaches us to do, as far as I'm concerned. And, this is a mess of our own making. And because it's of our own making, we can unmake it and resolve it.
Well, I'm glad you put it right there, right before we go to commercial break. We're going to come back and pick up this topic of the migrant crisis unfolding in New York, which is really out of control. Don't change that dial for more What Happened Here. Stay tuned. Hey, everybody, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. If you have any questions, definitely send it our way. Be more than happy to answer it. And looking forward to connecting with you on these important topics. A lot to discuss, lot to unpack, especially with this migrant crisis. It is, oh boy, it's tough. And when school starts and you start seeing, you know, um, kids that need additional help versus kids that are just arriving here and getting all the attention and all the resources, parents are going to feel very, very, very frustrated that their child, who's been, not just here, but asking for the higher level of services and not getting it, you're going to see a lot of tensions flare up when school starts. And that's one of the things that I hope the federal government really takes a strong position on, and says we're gonna help the schools, we're gonna help the education systems ensure that every child has access to a fair and quality education, but don't neglect American citizens who have already been neglected, and don't disrespect American citizens, because it's wrong to allow, you know, someone new just walk in and be like, "Oh, it's mine. Give me that." And I mean, all due respect to them, to the migrants taking an incredible journey to get here, there still has to be a two-way street. So we'll talk more about that when we come back from break. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. My name is Rich Thomas, former mayor of Mount Vernon. You listen to What Happened Here on 1460 on your AM dial, worldwide at WVOX.com. Now, before we went to break, we were talking about the migrant crisis in New York that's unfolding. If you want to call in and add to it, ask questions, the call-in number is 914-636-0110. Again, that's 914-636-0110. And our special guest today helping us unpack the issues is former Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District. That's Charles Knapp. He's also a former Assistant Manhattan District Attorney and also served as the Inspector General in the city of Mount Vernon. So very happy to have him on to unpack these issues that are, going to continue to get worse until they are really solved or at least addressed enough so there's a structure around preventing more damage to be done to, our communities. And one of the things that I know is going to pop up with the migrant crisis is school. Schools are going to go back into session in the next couple weeks if they have not already begun for some municipalities. But when schools go back into session, you're going to see children that deserve access to a fair and quality education gain access to that. But you're going to see parents and children frustrated that they were here, rightfully American citizens, that were denied the same level of services or attention that migrants that are seeking asylum here in the United States are receiving ahead of them. So my hope is that the federal government acknowledges that tension and they do something to diffuse it now. They don't just wait for passions to boil over or more lawsuits to be filed. My hope is that the federal government takes a stand and says, look, we're going to support education systems. We acknowledge that there have been some shortcomings in some areas that need to be addressed. Here are some additional resources to address those issues. And by the way, we're going to provide additional support for the migrants seeking asylum. So I just hope, Charlie, that the federal government they act and they don't act like nothing is happening. They actually act and do something to help communities that are going to face these extra expenses. And for many, many can't afford it.
Yeah, well, I think that looking at politics, I don't really see because they've had so many opportunities before. They're necessarily interested in solving and really addressing the immigration either so much as using it to score points against their opponents and to use it as part of their fundraising vehicle. In a well-ordered universe, of course, immigration being a federal matter would be entirely appropriate for the federal government to assist the state in funding for shelter for immigrants, in assisting the state and localities in funding for schooling. Although on that issue, I think that since COVID, if I'm not mistaken, the number of kids in public schools is down relatively dramatically. So you would expect kids from immigrant families, whether legal or illegal, to fill in that gap. So you think that the teachers union might be fine and supportive of keeping children of immigrant families, whatever their legal status, because A, you don't visit the sins of the parents on the children, and B, you want to give the children something A, to do during the day, and B, to equip them to be in a position to add to either American society if they made here, or to the country where they came from, or some third country where they land up. There is never a downside to having an educated person in the community. So it's to be viewed as an opportunity for positive federal intervention. But my fear is it's going to be, one group versus the other, looking at what are perceived to be their personal advantages being away. And if we look at it in terms of, well, they jumped the line on this, and therefore, what they deserve to starve to death in the streets of New York. That's not a very good answer, and I think that as Americans, we can do much better. And the only way we're going to get some push on this is for the communities to get together and model what we do best, and that is to provide a fair and generous response.
As you hear, that's another signal for a quick commercial break. Don't change that dial. Listen to what happened here on 1460 WVOX, talking about the migrant crisis in New York and a few other topics that's going to, be some important issues that we have to explore when we come back from this quick break. Don't change that dial. Thank you guys for joining us. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Yeah, and look, I'm part Native American, so I definitely can lay claim to being one of the original ancestries here. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we come back from break. But I'm just saying, like, man, this is federal government got to step up, y'all. What do y'all think? It's gonna go grab a quick snack.
From various industries, learn how they put their part into their work. So it's generously supported by our partners at Yonkers Canyon. We worship since 1923, celebrating 100 years of service. With heart, join me on Mondays at noon, right here at 1460 WVOX. It's 5 p.m. That's what north. Relationship. Emotional like green, or much more. So keep on the board. That's the north. We're from.
Come back from break. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. My name is Rich Thomas, former mayor of Mount Vernon. You're listening to What Happened Here on 1460 on your AM dial or worldwide on WVOX.com. Now, today, our very special guest is former Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District, Charles Knapp. He also served as former Assistant Manhattan District Attorney, as well as Inspector General in the city of Mount Vernon. And happy to have him on to unpack the issues. And the issues that we're diving into today include the migrant crisis in New York City. We're going to touch upon in a few moments the decision at the state level to halt the cannabis program, where there are some parties that say they should have been included in the first round of decisions made by the state, whereas a Sullivan County judge, Ulster County judge, agreed with the complainants for now, allowing a restraining order to take foot. But that issue of cannabis in New York is really something that I want to talk about because it seems to be another dynamic that needs to be dealt with in the state. But the last part, I know that some of us are gonna be watching, even though from opposite parties, the GOP debates, presidential debates, are going to happen without the front runner. And curious to get your feedback and thoughts on how that's going to go, and if you want to quickly touch upon the latest round of indictments for former President Donald Trump, we have that topic too. So the phone number to call in is 914-636-0110. Again, it's 914-636-0110. Charlie, I know we kind of covered the migrant crisis, and I think it's clear that the federal government has to step up and New York State has to start being more assertive and aggressive in what it can do and should do to kind of help local municipalities deal with the challenges and dynamics of the migrant crisis. But I think the real reality is we really need the federal government to own this and address it and not ignore it. And there's a Siena College poll that came out that said more than 80% of New Yorkers feel the same way. So, any final thoughts on this issue? Because I definitely want to talk about cannabis and get to the other topics that I know some of our listeners are eager for us to address.
Yeah, additional thing is that if the migrant crisis is going to be, it's going to have to be well, very supposed to help. It's just, yeah, conceptually, I don't like the way the federal government is handling this, but however they choose to handle it, I don't want to see migrants in my neighborhood. Well, that's really not going to be helpful. You can't, ghettoize these people in former airports, in unused stadiums, and wherever else they're thinking of putting parks for anything. It's going to require the cooperation of the American people. And in point of fact, uh, the fact that these immigrants want to come to the United States should be a point of pride for Americans, not a point of contention. And I think that we have room, we have opportunity. We are an optimistic people. We have an expanding economic potential.
Yep.
And I think that, as in the past, fresh blood coming in from inside the four corners of the United States not only benefit us in the long term. They're going to be perfect? No. They're going to be 100% law-abiding people? No. Our own society is not 100% law-abiding, but I think certainly we should be as generous and as open-eyed and open-minded as possible.
Yeah, and I can say the the real answer is we have to build, and there's already a housing crisis. There's a housing shortage in New York City alone. But building, allowing some of these old office buildings to be reconverted in, to be converted into housing, is something that could help alleviate some of the housing pressures that exist already, but also absorb some of the migrants that need a place to live while they go through the process of asylum, fast or slow, whatever the case is. We need, as you point out, to have a game plan, and the game plan cannot be, you know, let's make this up as we go and just hope nobody notices. That's not
Yeah.
that's not going to work, and it's not working right now. So we
Right,
def-
but to your point, I know that many people, not just Republicans, but many people believe that our society is overregulated. This could be a very good opportunity to each
deregulate.
municipality review its codes, building codes, and regulations to see what is really necessary, what regulations are duplicative or no longer necessary to house, and with a view towards streamlining application processes and permitting. I think you started to do that when you were mayor of Mount Vernon, but this could be an opportunity nationwide for not just the federal government, but for each state and municipality to start reviewing their own regulations and make them a little bit more user friendly, and also a little bit more targeted so that, for instance, if there are environmental concerns, those can be addressed a little bit more directly, where in a sense you get more bang for the immigration crisis can be used for many valuable purposes.
And you're spot on, especially when it comes to getting government out the way and trying to get government to move at the speed of business. It's been done before, no doubt. It can be done again. The only issue I think is there isn't enough political will to do it. And if you step back and think for one moment, how many people fly in the country on a daily basis. And when you think about how the FAA is able to process people, and get them through security and get them on a plane and kind of, track from start to finish all these small, very important pieces of transportation, having a very similar FAA system to help process and manage the migration issue, should be easy. It shouldn't be that difficult for immigration, aviation, and other big tech companies to kind of help create this matrix of sorts so that people can be processed, and also the processes to approve new construction. It shouldn't take that long to allow for. But that's where politics comes in, and that's where and why we have a court halt with the cannabis program in New York State, because as the legislature was attempting to streamline the application process, and they identified groups of people, including veterans, as disadvantaged and being wronged by the system over time. When they gave priority to these populations, one of the populations that has a priority said they were not priority enough, and now an entire industry is being held up from advancing because the government tried to get out of the way. So I'm really confused here, where it's like you have an opportunity to streamline, and create the jobs and get going, but yet everything is at a halt because one group felt that their rights were violated, and the court agreed. So I'm curious, Charlie, what's the ultimate play here? Because it's my understanding that the state of New York was working toward processing applications from all disadvantaged groups. I can't speak to their timing or how they allocated their time, which applications to prioritize or not. I just know that it's clear to me that they're processing the applications. So, do you have any thoughts on this or how it's going to play out?
Yeah, well, I think this is, I don't know the plaintiff, but I can't help but wonder if this is really a political agenda. Uh, as they say, throw it together at work or one trend. And it seems to me that you have a limited number of permits, really. It's not open ended. And it's for the government to balance these things so long as there's no legal discrimination, meaning racial, gender, religion, those constitutional things. Uh, Veterans have veteran references.
Right.
It's acknowledgement of their country, whether they serve in frontline comps or working the med ball doesn't really matter.
They serve.
Time out from being civilians to serve, so it's appropriate.
Yep.
Is it for a court to rejigger the balance that legislature came up with in the absence of any illegality? No. But this judge hasn't ruled on the merit. All he said is basically,
Hold up.
hold up, let's hear the arguments and I'll decide. But he may very well turn them down at the end of the day, and this will be a blip on the way to
Legalization.
overemployment for people, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and that's what my take on it is. It's the judge not only respecting the veterans but hearing the arguments out. And my assessment is, New York has an opportunity to hire more people to do more processing, and I think that's where New York can seize an opportunity to say, look, we're going to make sure that these applications that represent these groups get processed within the next 21 days. And I think that would be a respectable response because it's been however long since many applicants have applied. It would be great to have finality and certainty to when these applications will be reviewed and decided upon, or at least the process can be better explained. So my hope is that New York, continues to remain active, engaged, and use this as an opportunity to just say we recognize that they weren't moving, I guess, as fast enough or whatever, but we're not going to allow anybody's rights to be infringed upon. We're going to do everything in our power to make sure that all rights are respected. And I hope that's the ultimate outcome within the next, week or so that everybody can move on to, opening up this industry because at the end of the day, California, Colorado are doing tremendous things with their cannabis industries, and there's no reason why New York should not be doing the same. New Jersey's doing pretty well as well. So it just seems like we're cutting off our nose to spite our face, and it's not like it's just New York needs to step up and stand strong with the veterans that are complaining and make sure that all the issues are addressed as quickly as possible. And I don't think it requires a legislature to do anything other than the law is clear that they're included. It's just I think New York had an allocation, a capital allocation problem that resulted in such a delay.
Yeah, and it's not just New Jersey. Massachusetts has a century benefit, I think, starts next year. So, if New York wants to look at it from a fiscal perspective, a lot of people are just going to go over the border, and their New York tax dollars, in a sense, will just wind up going into the Jersey or Connecticut or Massachusetts coffers, depending on how far afield people want to go. So, it's inevitable that New York is going to have this. I guess it just needs to be worked out because I really don't see a problem in the way New York legislature set up the law.
Yeah, and look, it's clear to me that New York State wants to see this program advance. It's clear to me that even the complainants, those that file this complaint to say, hold up, wait a minute, they want to see it go too. So I just hope that the parties find a path to resolution. But don't change that dial because we have a few more paths to explore when we come back from this quick commercial break. Don't change that dial. Listen to what happened here. It's the final segment, y'all. We're gonna talk through some of the broader national issues, and we'll wrap up on cannabis as well because it's an important topic that we talk through and discuss so that everybody knows that there's some dynamics that are holding it back, but we have ways to build it up and bring it back. Hopefully, the courts take the lead and get it done, or at least the parties involved in the case get it done because it's important that we get this behind us so everybody can move on. To me, and we're back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. My name is Rich Thomas, former mayor of Mount Vernon. You're listening to What Happened Here, and we are here every Wednesday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. asking the question, what happened here? What happened here with the particular situation, issue, or, something that's in the news? What I can tell you is we're talking with our very special guest, Charles Knapp, former Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District, former Assistant Manhattan District Attorney, and also he served as Inspector General in the city of Mount Vernon. So very happy to have Charlie with us today to talk about the issues. We talked about the migrant crisis in New York City. We talked about the cannabis court halt, and two more topics I guess we can tap into very briefly because I know the migrant crisis is something that we're getting pinged on right now. But I definitely want to touch upon the presidential debate tonight that's going to not feature the front runner on the GOP side, but also the latest set of issues that former President Trump faces in Georgia with the latest indictment, number 4. So, Charlie, before we went to break, I know we were talking about cannabis. It looks like that's hopefully on a path to resolution. But the path ahead, be it on the other side of the aisle, on the Republican side, they're going to have a debate tonight. I don't have too much thoughts about it other than it's going to be interesting to watch and see how the entire debate is going to be about President Trump more so than anything. And Trump is facing some more issues in Georgia. You want to start with Georgia and just kind of help people understand what's going on there?
Well, Georgia is a very interesting case. Not sure when it's going to get to trial because it's got 18 defendants in it, but it's a racketeering case and a conspiracy case, and it lays out the allegations relating to not only how, in the view of the prosecutors, President Trump tried to force the state official to, quote, fine 11,800 votes or whatever it was. And I guess to use the old Clinton line, it'll depend on what fine means. Does it mean makeup, or was there some load of missed votes that hadn't been counted? That's pretty unlikely. So it should be clear upon a presentation of the evidence that find means makeup, and you can't do that certainly at that level. I mean, every election has a certain level of incompetence, sometimes fraud, where ballots are just not counted or counted improperly, or the occasional dead person votes. In fact, in Georgia, I think the number was 2. In Florida, there were some people who were found to have voted in not only Florida, but North Carolina. I think there were 2 or 3. They were all Republicans, needless to say. And because these happened to be white guys, they got off with a fine and they gave probation, whereas felons in Florida who were told, yes, they could vote, were vigorously prosecuted by the state of Florida and were given terms. We do have an uneven system there. But getting back to the Georgia matter, it's a very serious one. The one that I don't really understand at all in terms of passing the red face test or the laugh test, whatever you want to call it, is it lining up fake electors. In other words, electors not designated by the state who impersonated real electors. There's no way that could even approach being legal, especially they were carried out. You have to be some level of dumb to believe that you were at a minimum not being used by other people to engage in that conduct. And I suspect that many of those people are the ones who are going to flip and turn state's evidence and provide testimony as to what they were actually told about what was going on. But if I'm John Eastman, of course I take the public position of I was providing legal advice because that's late defense. But we know from bitter experience that just because you do provide sound legal advice, which I underlined, Eastman did not, in my view.
Right.
They can go after you if they're looking at bigger fish to fry. So while that's a concern, and we all know, I think, on this radio show I'm referring to specifically, who was, I believe, railroaded. But there could be larger agendas. I just don't see it in this indictment. This indictment is law country. Yeah, there may be some leakage here and there, but you can't steal a presidential election the way this was planned to be. That said, with respect to the debate, if I'm President Trump, of course I do not unify my opponents with appearing on the same stage as they do.
Right.
Why would I? I have nothing to gain and everything to lose.
And
Get a phone call.
Hey, caller, thank you for calling in. You're on What Happened Here.
Hello?
Hey, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, just a question for you again.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I understand the vagueness of the Trump statement that he made to the Georgia Secretary of State, but what about the veiled threat that he made of violating if he violated the federal laws, that he could face criminal consequences? Okay, that was also in that telephone call. You think that has an effect on it as the head of the executive branch?
Well, I mean, look, as they say, no one is above the law.
Right.
The entire context of the phone call itself, plus everything else these people were doing, the phone call was just the tip of the iceberg, frankly.
Right.
The investigation seems to have uncovered quite a bit of additional evidence. So when it all piles up like that, it ain't a molehill anymore. It's a mountain. And if a jury accepts that evidence, then, that results in a conviction. Then it's up to the judge to decide on the appropriate sentence. But
I'm sure you understand the civil RICO, or criminal RICO law. That you don't really need to commit a crime to be convicted of a RICO. It's just predicate acts.
Well, right. I mean, it's very broad. It was originally targeted towards crime families, mobsters, and gangsters, and things like that. It then, of course, wound up being used in divorce proceedings and God knows what. But those days, I think, are over. But yeah, it's a very serious charge. It's not easy to prove. But,
We'll ask that question to the middle law group.
You have to have reasonable belief that these precedents occurred. So if you could have never committed a crime, but you convicted of RICO.
Well, look, in a conspiracy, if it's told from the outset by the government, namely, what could be viewed as entrapment, where the government gets involved, the conspiracy by definition can never achieve its goal. So the ultimate crime never have been committed because the FBI or whoever, the DEA, is watching you, every step of the way, and they pull the plug at the.
What do you think about Rudy Giuliani being indicted for RICO?
I suppose if you wanted to engage with the Schadenfreude, what comes around goes around, but it's a sad day. The whole thing is very sad if you step away from the partisanship angle, that people who are supposed to be serving, the American citizens fail so incredibly at that task. If you go into public service, you're supposed to be a servant of the public.
Yeah.
Many people do it to, be invited to, I shouldn't say many, a certain number of people do it for what I view as the wrong reason: popularity, lining their pockets, celebrity, whatever it may be, as opposed to why you're supposed to run for office. It's to make America a better place than it was when you came in.
All right, thank you very much.
Well, look, that's our show. No other better way to end it than that. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our special guest, Charles Knapp, for being with us and providing the insight that's helped us figure out what happened here. We'll see you next week. Don't change that dial. Okay, everybody. Thank you.